Thank you all for joining us for this follow-up session to our Farm Foundation Forum, Understanding the EU Farm to Fork Strategy and its Implications for U.S. Agriculture. We received a large number of outstanding questions during the forum and wanted to provide this additional opportunity for our panelists to address those questions. Joining us again for this session are Tassos Haniotis, Director of Strategy, Simplification, and Policy Analysis for the Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development at the European Commission, Hardacre, Director of Public Affairs for CropLife Europe, and Marta Messa, Director for Slow Food Europe. We will begin with you, Tassos, with a question related to trade and import tariffs. So one of our audience members noted that there seem to be policy approaches that would not depend on import tariffs to be effective. She wonders, can we not move to a discussion, the goal of which is to debate policy implementation options? So if there's a policy response that requires tariffs to be effective, might there be other or different policy options?
There are many policy options, and it's a very pertinent question, and the focus is not only on trade. I mean, the discussion on trade is stemming from the fact that the trade rules that we have right now are rules that reflect the situation in the 1990s. In the meantime, many things have changed, so there is an increasing need to try to find some ways whereby we should take into account other dimensions that are also affected by trade, and the sustainability is one of these dimensions. But the most effective way of addressing this type of issues does not necessarily have to relate to tariffs, especially because, as we know, trade is a two-way street. So if you change your tariffs, others could do the same. No, the issue is much broader. And that's why the real focus that we have on the Green Deal strategy is mainly to turn it into a growth strategy that addresses most of the changes through changes in technology. And by the way, since this follow-up is taking place quite some time after the previous one, at least, I mean, the position right now to say that we have put out the new genome techniques report in the European Commission, and that also reflects very clearly that it's a much broader strategy than just one that is focusing on what you do with tariffs.
Great, thank you. Alan or Marta, would you like to respond?
I can just jump in on the MRL point that I think the question was pointed towards, which is, actually, in fact, it's probably linked to what Tassos says, in the sense that there is a very political discussion around MRLs in the EU right now. And there is a slight difference of opinion between the Commission and the Parliament. But I'd say that the politics of this is a symptom of what Tassos is just discussing. It's not an actual issue in itself. It's just one manifestation of differences of opinion about the Green Deal and the direction of travel and the need to do things differently. So I guess the thing that would be stressed here, as Tassos says, is also that okay to have a discussion about the future of MRLs and how we want to use them. It just needs to be done in an open, transparent, and predictable way. At the moment, as things keep getting caught up in political hotspots, it's becoming rather unpredictable, which has an unfortunate impact on trade. But yes, very political space right now.
So Tassos and Marta, you both spoke to the need for greater ambition and urgency regarding climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. How do you see the European Commission or others thinking about future carbon pricing mechanisms for food and agriculture value chains?
I think this is one of the avenues we're looking on. It does have it promises certain things, but we need to look at what is the mechanism by which the price is going to be representative. There are experiences and efforts that have been taking place for at least more than a decade in the United States with limited success. There is a workshop that we will organize soon in the European Union to see what we can do more concretely on that. And we hope that once we finalize the CAP reform proposal, carbon pricing would be one of the mechanisms that would be advanced with the eco schemes.
Yes, regarding carbon pricing mechanism, as Law-Food, we have not been closely looking into this. There's just, of course, what has been a long-standing issue with the carbon pricing mechanism, but just that it doesn't become, so to say, an excuse to continue business as usual, just for the exchange of carbon pricing. So this is really just a small take on this very specific question.
To clarify, Marta is absolutely right. What we need to do is not come in a situation where you have a certain farming practice and a certain economic practice that pollutes, and then you have an exchange between the two. Everything stays the same, and then we say that this is doing something. No, the whole idea is to find ways that you provide incentives for people to move into new best practices that really improve on the ground and in a measurable way the performance and reduce the footprint.
And following up on that, in terms of measurement at the farm level, do you anticipate, any politics among member states, as you look towards putting together some of these, incentive structures or measurement issues?
What you measure depends to a very large extent to the type of methodology you apply and the type of indicators we have. For us, the issue is to improve the quality of the indicators we have and introduce some new elements. You have mixed responses so far for the member states, but most of the resistance sometimes relates to the administrative burden that they feel that they will have by trying to measure these things. That's why it's extremely important to link this with a digital and green shift in the recovery package that we have in place right now, because my feeling is that one of the issues that has been underestimated is the capacity that we have right now is to use information that already exists in a much more efficient way than what we were doing in the past. So once this is done and once transparency is achieved, I do not see that people will try. It's nobody's interest to try to hide something like that. In the modern society, it's extremely difficult to hide things.
True. Very true. Great. So we had, again, several questions about incentive mechanisms for farmers. So how, or even should, can the EU, the US, or other governments best incentivize farmers and ranchers to adopt these practices, sustainable practices in production and distribution in a way that's meaningful, I think, as you were touching on.
I guess the question is for me.
Yeah, either for you or Alan, either way.
Because the US administration is not there. No, I think it is important to keep in mind that the challenges are similar, but the approach to addressing these challenges could differ. The structure of US agriculture and the structure of EU agriculture is not the same, and within the EU we don't have the same structure of agriculture among the member states. This is why we have provided a very significant flexibility to member states in terms of the measures that they apply, and where we don't provide flexibility is in terms of the targets that I have to meet. There are these 9 very specific targets around which they have to demonstrate an increase in the level of ambition that they have from the starting point. Now, I saw also a couple of questions about the subsidies and the role that subsidies play. And we also have here sometimes a rather artificial distinction and debate in the European Union, splitting subsidies that are used for income support and subsidies that are going for agro-environmental measures. For some of us that are doing analysis over the years of the CAP, this has always been the wrong approach, because you need to find ways whereby you combine the economic and the environmental performance of the farms instead of pitting one against the other. So what is extremely important in this respect is, first of all, to clarify and increase what in our jargon we used to call cross-compliance, and now we call conditionality, the type of practices and environmentally mainly related legislation that farmers would have to respect. Second, provide a layer that is fixed of basic income support that does not, as one put in the questions, compensate for what was lost in the past. That happened more than 20 years ago, but provides a fixed level of income, so the volatility that naturally comes from the market reduces, and then provide incentives through agro-environmental measures, or now the eco schemes, that would allow farmers to move into implementing new type of practices that usually have, at least in the short term, a very an increased level of costs, and gradually with this transition be able to respond better in the future to these challenges.
Great, thank you.
If I could just add to that, and I think you also mentioned it in the previous session, Tassos, but also the importance of advisory services. So besides the incentive mechanisms that you can have in place, the transition also means, if you want, a cultural shift, and in the thinking, also in the way you do farming. So it's also, if you look at, the incentive mechanisms we have had up to now in terms of the common agricultural policy, they've been clearly pushing in a certain direction, and changing a farm structure or farm business model doesn't happen overnight, clearly. So it takes time, it takes investments, it takes also training. And in that sense, again, the role of advisory services is crucial as much as it is the role of education at large. So what education programs are being offered, for instance, at universities? Do we have sufficient amounts of universities offering programs, for instance, in regenerative agriculture or agroecology? So it's also a matter of how do we train to make sure that, also the new generations, we have to give space to the new generation to access the world of agriculture and farming, because that's another big barrier that there is at the moment, access to land and credit for young generations. But, the role of education in the field through the advisory services, but also earlier, is of course also very crucial. And just one small thing, because Marta, you clearly also mentioned, it's not just about production, but also about distribution and so on. And in past surveys we've been doing with farmers from the Slow Food Network and other partner organizations, one thing that also comes out very clearly is the importance of infrastructures. So if you're in remote areas and you have no internet connection, or you have no road that allows you to reach the closest market, or if you're a farmer and you want to sell, but there is no infrastructure for a farmer's market in the nearest urban center, that is of course also a very clear barrier to sell products in a more local, direct, and, if you want, sustainable way. So there's also besides incentives, also very basic infrastructural questions to be addressed.
Great.
Marta, sorry, I just jump in. It's I don't want to make this a metaphysical discussion, but it's around the notion of the word incentive, and I think the key is an incentive remains very much that it doesn't become prescriptive, that it doesn't incentivize a solution that has been predetermined. Incentive should promote a behavior; it shouldn't force a behavior, and I think that's just there's a fine line here that we need to be careful of. Incentives should have optionality attached to them, and especially when it comes to farmers, this should be about opening up possibilities, not closing them down. I just think there is a metaphysical thing that's quite careful.
Well, I think Alan raises a very important point, especially now that we are in the last weeks before we hope to finalize the future CAF proposal. Because what comes in legislation very often is extremely difficult to interpret and understand. And there's going to be one more philosophical and theological debate about whether the legislator means one or the other thing. But what is exactly important is what you said. We need to give the opportunity to farmers to experiment and risk certain things to see what works and what doesn't work. And also the link to the point that Marta raised before, what we're trying to do with this farm sustainability data network is use a network that already exists with farms, add more information about their environmental performance, but make it voluntary, keep it voluntary as it is today, so that they would be able to benchmark their performance compared to an average or regional member state sectoral, ask advice about how they can change their practices, but also provide feedback to the research projects so new knowledge can be produced that is useful. And many of these ideas, I mean, to a US audience, remind very much the extension service that you have had, and I was familiar, at least when I was there, and I explored it. But in the European Union, we don't have the same situation in all member states. There are some that are pretty much advanced, some are lagging behind. And that's where there is an innovation partnership in agriculture with 2,000 actors involved. What is very important in these actors is they usually tend to talk to each other with similar experiences to be able to transfer the experience and the knowledge that some have from one part of Europe to another, so that everybody gets something out of this process.
Okay, thank you. So let's turn to specifically to food for a moment. We had a number of questions on this related to food affordability and so forth. So our next question asks, how does the farm to fork policy impact food affordability? So Marta, would you like to start there?
Yes, I guess the answer is we do not know exactly yet. And the question is, again, it's also about the basically pricing mechanism that is what I was explaining or raising as an issue in the previous meeting we had, which is really, are we going to be able to do, or is there an intention to go in the direction of true cost accounting? Because as it is the situation nowadays, for instance, if you look in Europe, as a European citizen, you're paying for your food. Clearly, when you go buy it, you pay as a taxpayer for instance, the resources that go into the common agricultural policy. You're paying also at the same time, though, for the health bill. We do have evidence of the costs that is related to basically illnesses related to bad diets, and the total bill that is for the whole European society. You do pay for other programs to depollute water sources or depollute soils. So in a way, like, you're paying multiple times. It just doesn't come through at once in your food bill when you go to do the grocery shopping. So the question is, is there an intention to go towards true cost accounting? Because if that is the case, and if you take into account negative and positive externalities, which is of course easier said than done, but if you go in that direction, then there would be a shift in the way food is being priced. And so the point that we are making together with other civil society organizations is that if, again, we aim for a greener Europe, we aim for more sustainable consumption patterns and diets, then the more sustainable food choice should become also the one that is affordable. It doesn't mean, though, that it should be cheaper than what is cheap nowadays on the market, because in fact, the problem nowadays with some of the prices we have is that farmers are not rewarded fairly for all the work they do. And we still have at the same time problem with indeed people not having access to food. So it's really about, taking a step back. And if you want to going in, like just you, like Alan, you were discussing what are incentives, but here is like what is price? We need to have more of a discussion about how do we develop the food price. And again, yes. So if we do manage to go in that direction, then there is, there is the possibility to make good food, quality food available for everyone. But it also goes hand in hand, not just with food pricing, but with how food is distributed, food is produced. As always, it's a big picture that matters.
Mm-hmm. So if we're thinking about people who are food insecure today, and by 2030, if we look at the farm to fork policy, can you see how that might affect that kind of current and that future, the state of food insecurity in there? Can you talk about the predictions potentially on those spaces?
Well, one of the things that we have seen in the various analysis we do on market developments is that we don't have one type of consumer. Mm-hmm. We have a very segmented part of consumers, and for some, in fact, for a very significant part of the population, the price of food will continue to be very important. That doesn't mean that this food, even if it continues to come at the price that it comes, it shouldn't meet sustainability criteria. I mean, as I have said in the previous session we had, I firmly believe that there is scope and prospects for a reduction in, not immediately, but in the medium term, of the cost of production in all different types of best practices, including the ones that affect the more traditional type of agriculture. The biggest problem we have seen, and this is not only a European problem, is that you don't have really full price transmission across the food chain. The price that farmers face is one thing, how volatility and variation in this price goes to the consumers is another thing, and part of it has to do with the fact that a very significant part of the cost of production is not the raw material, of course, it's all the other in between. So there is an issue there that will continue to be challenging in the future. And the second issue that is also extremely important, and I also mentioned it last time, it's that the demand for food is not just the price and quantity relationship. Above all is the taste and preferences. And unless there is a change in the will of consumers, not only to respond in one way in questionnaires, but we respond in the same way when they go and purchase certain products in the supermarket, we might face more challenges than what we see. But it is true that this is one of the areas that we need much more analysis to see what the impacts are going to be. In the last session, I thought that the ideas of the USD, of the ERS about what they haven't analyzed yet, but they want to analyze in terms of the demand side were very interesting. Some of my colleagues that were following that, especially from the GRC, were saying that we move in the similar direction as well.
Great. And staying on that consumer preferences question, I guess, for a moment, we did have some questions about access to local products throughout the year, and what is the sentiment of EU consumers, specifically on local food? Is there a position that all food needs to be met through local farming?
Yeah, I saw this this question, and also same thing about organic. We're not talking about having everybody move to organic or everybody move to local, and we know that clearly is not going to be the case. But what we also see as a case is that there is a trend towards more organic, and there is a trend towards more local, and that's a real. It's expressed. In COVID we saw it strengthened, but it was expressed already before. And in the analysis we have done, we've seen this trend expressed. So, here we have to see that if we move in that direction, there are going to be certain areas where clearly there is going to be benefit for the local farming sector, and there's going to be benefit, which you see actually in parts in the US. You do have local markets that have helped a lot farmers of a certain size that are closer to city centers, so to do that. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about encouraging trends that are already on the ground and that do have a positive impact. But we're not saying that the other parts of farming will stop existing. All parts of farming, however, need to improve their environmental footprint. That's the main message that we want to pass.
And maybe if I can add to this, like you said, rightfully, Tassos, the pandemic gave a push in this direction of people. Like, if you look at the growth that there has been, for instance, in terms of community-supported agriculture, so CSAs, models, and so on, it has increased significantly over the course of basically last year. And one thing that we have experienced also as a network, and we have noticed, is that very often, it's not the case maybe for everyone, but very often people have been coming together to support their own, local community, whether it is through, food distribution programs for more vulnerable groups, but also in terms of supporting local producers and farmers to keep selling their products. Because of course, as we know, there were very big problems in terms of the distribution and continuing to sell through the usual channels. So, and this trend, this push that there was towards greater community practices, if you want, and involvement, is very positive in the sense that, food is not just a commodity, clearly. And Tassos, you also said there is also the taste and the cultural aspect of food, and food is also something that brings people together. And that's where also we've been seeing in our movement, that's where the change then happens. Because if you have citizens, and let's call them consumers, but people talking directly to their producers, that's where they can ask directly questions and ask, why are you keeping your animals all the time in the dark and they're not allowed to go out in the pasture? That's where, if you want, also part of the cultural change happens through this much closer connection between citizens and producers. So this is just to say there's been a push, and there is an eagerness to and an interest in in indeed local, biodiverse, and food products.
So let's turn now from food to technology. Alan, to what extent might digital and precision agriculture, do you think, might be able to compensate for reduced inputs? What might this look like?
So I think it can look like many things, and I think it certainly has the possibility to be part of the solution. So again, back to this idea of making sure that farmers have access to different new and alternative ways of doing things that are more sustainable, then I think absolutely we should be looking at technology. And this can be anything in the EU these days, from you have urban farms in warehouses, you have greenhouses, you have drones, and if we're going, this is the digital and precision space. It is a big and a very exciting space. There's lots of different developments in here. It obviously, however, throws up a lot of questions, and I think that's where Europe is perhaps a little bit behind other parts of the world in allowing technology to market, and in fact even just having the discussion. I think in our experience of trying to discuss this within the European Union, and certainly with the political levels of the Parliament, it seems to be that digital and precision equals drone, which obviously it is not simply just a drone. There is much more to this. So yes, I think there's a lot in this. There's a lot of discussion needs to be had about what aspects of precision and digital are the ones that we want to take forward. But then, as I think Marta flagged earlier, you have certain infrastructure questions come up. There's a lot of things get tied into that, Martha. But yeah, lots of opportunity needs to be discussed.
Tassos or Marta, do you want to comment on the agricultural technology?
Yeah, if I may, because this is one of the issues that comes often in speeches, and especially because there is a certain hesitation, both from certain farmers that consider that precision farming is only for big farms, or for certain parts of the civil society, that every time you mention something with precision farming, you have some reactions that are a little bit allergic to the notion of productivity. Now, productivity is something that applies to all forms of farming and all practices. It just implies that you are able to produce a certain amount with less inputs. And what we have tried to do in our annual agricultural lateral conferences, and bring every year different forms of farming and different representatives of farmers, mainly of the younger generation, that use their knowledge in a full spectrum. And precision farming has significantly shown the potential to increase yields and reduce very significantly the chemical inputs. And the same thing we have seen with other forms of farming. Where do we see sometimes bottlenecks is exactly in the infrastructure that was mentioned by Marta before, because you have areas where if the internet coverage is not really what it should be, I mean, you can still download this data from satellites, but it costs much more. And what we have also seen an issue, which I've seen it also in the US, is the issue of privacy of data that is linked to precision farming. And in this particular area, there's a very interesting protocol of cooperation between our COPA-COGECA, which is the union of all the farm organizations in the European Union, with the industry, in order to make sure that there is a guarantee in the respect of the private data that the farmers provide, which is a necessary requirement to have better applications of precision farming. As long as there are doubts about the ownership of this data, then there's going to be hesitation in putting it in practice, and we will not see all the benefits exploited.
If I can also jump in on this, and it's good then that I get the chance to talk after you, Tassos. And we probably belong to the category that gets itchy when you mention productivity, but it's not the productivity per se that is a problem, and I just use the chance to clarify. It's rather the seeking continuously to increase yields when we know there are data about the fact that it's not, the problem with food insecurity is not the lack of supply of food, is rather as said, the distribution of food that is, and there's no equity in that distribution, but also in the access to the resources. So this is just to clarify, producing, using at best the resources is of course something very good. Now the question with like if you want the issues or like some of the concerns that are connected to digitalization, for instance, and you just mentioned it now, is indeed who manages that knowledge. And as things stand nowadays, there is a very concrete concern that just as we're experiencing a concentration of market power, for instance, in the seed market within the hands of a few companies, the same could happen in terms of knowledge. And what would that mean in terms of, the democratic element of food system and, the freedom of farmers and citizens alike to decide what kind of food systems they want. So that's something that clearly needs to be clarified. And the other thing about precision farming, as I mentioned in the last call, we are very much in favor of innovation and technology as long as it can be accessed by all and doesn't mean that it's concentrated in the hands of a few that then control the rest of the food system, as it has happened in some instances that are very well documented. But the issue is also another one that we strongly believe, and we have that experience within our movement, but it's not just us, that again, food is not just a commodity or something that can be monitored and controlled from a PC somewhere. There is a strong connection between human beings and nature and food is something that comes out of of nature. And we do know that if we're where we are nowadays with agriculture is because of thousands of years of experience of humankind interacting with nature, figuring out how to improve seeds and varieties and develop these very diversified food and farming systems that we have worldwide. So there is a very important, and if you want, it's also philosophical, but it's very concrete. There is a very important role that the farmers, as well as the fishing communities for that matter, and the herders and the harvesters play in having this very strong connection with nature and understanding how the climate is changing, how the weather is changing, how soil is doing. And that is something that we are afraid you're not gonna ever get if you rely only on digitalization. That again, you can say you can have a mix of digitalization and precision farming and so on, but we should never lose this strong connection because food is not, again, just a commodity. It's much more intrinsic to nature and our own nature as human beings.
May I add a couple of points here? Well, because I think it should. I mean, one of the things that we should do is try to dissociate a little bit the debate about what technology can do with different applications of technology. I mean, there are plenty of examples where, and we presented one of them on a big organic producer using blockchain to link to consumers directly last year. So that's a very typical example of a technical applications that are linked to that. Although I see some of the points that Marta raises, and with some, by the way, on a personal basis, I might agree. We are living in a world where the majority of the population is living in cities right now. And we have to take that into account as well. I still remember it was in the States when I heard that question the kids, where does milk come from? From the fridge. That's the knowledge of the modern world, if you want. And we need to find ways of also addressing this type of issues. And I don't think necessarily we disagree on that. And finally, on the point that you raised about the power being concentrated, which is true. I mean, we do have the same problem in social media, but I don't see many people worry about the privacy issues, or at least have the same worries on social media as they have when we have applications of precision farming and production, while the challenge is the same. We need rules that clearly protect what is private, but at the same time are transparent on what is public good. And this is an extremely interesting debate that we need to have in the area of agriculture, because a lot of the improvements we want to do in terms of best practices are actually measurable by satellites, drones, or other type of information. And the resistance to change and improving these practices is coming using the privacy of data as a pretext, because it's the public good data that people want to hide, and not the private one that has to be hidden actually and protected. And there are some fine distinctions there that, by the way, they're not only European distinctions. I've seen exactly the same debate in the US. And the idea in the farm sustainability data network on how we benchmark somebody's performance protecting the privacy of data came from what I heard some years ago at the USDA Agricultural Outlook, a private initiative in the United States.
Alan?
Yeah, just to sort of say, actually, again, Marta, I don't think we disagree. I think it's maybe not binary. I think the idea is that precision and digital can actually go hand in hand with the approach that you're talking about. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I don't think we want one extreme any more than we want the other extreme. And I think what we're trying to find is somewhere along this line. And then to the point of the domination by a few players, I think first of all, from where we can see things, the innovative, also the innovation in precision and digital agriculture is an incredibly big industry led by SMEs. This is globally very much an SME-led thing. There is, of course, a key point in here is that some of these innovations require significant development funds, which is why some of the bigger companies are the ones to carry them forward. So there you always end up with a bit of a discussion, a decision about the ability to carry innovation to market. And that's especially the case in the EU at the moment, where obviously the regulatory framework is somewhat anti-innovation, which is what we hope the Farm to Fork will create better pathways for all companies to bring to market a product, so we don't end up in a oligopoly or a binary situation.
Thank you. And while we were on technology, Tassos, you mentioned earlier the study about gene editing. Do you want to make a few remarks on that? We can talk maybe among the group here a little bit about how those might, those techniques. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what this report has done is actually outlined and identified the limitation we have with the current legislation, and legislation that's already 2 decades old, to address scientific developments, and that causes implementation challenges and also uncertainties. This study comes at a request of the Council to see what are the next steps after a European Court decision. And the next step now is to actually have a public consultation before we make, with an impact assessment, before we make the next proposal on how we move into applying these practices. What, in my view, because and anticipate some questions that people have, okay, we've heard this story before, what guarantees that you don't come up with the same situation as before? My feeling is that we need to use the pandemic and the experience from the pandemic to address the issue in a manner that is more middle ground and down to earth. What we have seen with the debate about vaccines is that you have biotechnology providing very concrete solutions and hopes. We have also seen that the question marks and the resistance to scientific evidence, it's not something that is a European characteristic, it's a world characteristic right now. And this is where the issue of communicating the benefits of science, being open about the potential risks that we have, but also moving the debate forward is something that we can do, taking into account the experiences that we have had with COVID. And this is where I believe that we need to have a very open and serious discussion about what we call science and what is the necessary rigor in the methodology of science that we need to have before we take decisions. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're living in a world where full of conspiracy theories and hesitations about the results of science. We're not out of the woods yet, but right. I think we have made a major step forward.
And for any of you, but how do you think that the gene editing technologies might help farmers achieve the objectives of the Farm to Fork strategy specifically?
I would start by looking at the climate change challenges, drought resistant, disease resistant crops. With climate change, we have seen very significant changes. We like to talk about climate change as an average change in temperature over the year, but that doesn't really tell the story. The big story is the enormous volatility and variation you have in weather events. and the implications this have for crops and also for animals, for forests and the rest. So if the starting point is what we have to do in order to address these particular diseases and challenges, then I believe that this is where we need to focus much more. There is an increase in the public money that goes, the EU money that goes into research. This is a small part of the total research projects in the European Union. And of course, this is an area where it's extremely important to have international cooperation. The challenges are similar, and all research organizations need to work together, and transparency is a must here, and some better mix between public and private research.
I think maybe I think there's 2 points. It's very much what Tassos says. This is about giving European farmers access to other tools. So, you know, if we're reducing the toolbox on one side by reducing pesticides, conventional pesticides, I think it is important that we give them other options to deal with the challenges that are not going away, that are actually multiplying. So I think this is, so in and as of itself, this is a very good opportunity to do that. The second thing that I think is perhaps lost a little bit in this, but is probably for us much more important. This is the study that just came out from the Commission is actually just a much bigger signal around innovation, around the ability to not legislate technology, but to looking at legislating application. So I think here there's a big signal that is very important for the agro innovation sector in Europe to know that potentially there's a space to operate in the future. Whereas, as we know, the agro innovation has been leaving Europe for years because it's been a closed space. So I think, you know, in and as with itself for farmers and their options, fantastic. As a signal to a broader innovation change, also very, very positive.
If I can jump in on this as well, I'll bring another perspective, as you can guess. But we are worried about the study of the Commission, and we responded to that with a press release right away, because, and we're in this case specifically looking essentially at how that could essentially weaken the current legislation that there is, that is based on the precautionary principle, and that is based on risk assessment and traceability, and you know, clear information both from farmers and for citizens, because we do know that there are many farmers in Europe, starting from the ones certified as organic, to many citizens that do not want to have any kind of GMO food, and for that matter also gene-edited food in their plate or in their fields. Having said that, I think one of the things that we're overlooking when we look at technology as a sort of as a sort of tool that can help us solve the issues we have, is that we are overlooking essentially biodiversity. Since the 1990s, we've lost 75% of plant genetic biodiversity because farmers have been moving for one reason or another towards certain conventional crops. And the same has happened in the world of, in terms of animal breeds being farmed, and the same goes even for the fish stock, if you want. And there are very clear FAO data about the loss of biodiversity and what kind of ripple effects that has overall on our ecosystems. And in that sense, it's a huge missed opportunity to overlook the biodiversity of indeed plant genetic diversity we have, but also animal breeds we have, which have adapted over time to climate conditions, to changing climates and so on, and that are very adapted to the local environments. Now, again, this goes back to what I was saying before about the strong connection between us as human beings, the environment, and food that comes out of the ecosystems in which we operate. And, you know, we do know that the food systems, for instance, that rely on local food biodiversity, so I'm talking about traditional and local plant varieties and animal breeds, are doing very well. And these animal variety breeds and plant varieties also usually tend to respond very well to changing climates and situations. So I'm just trying to say, let's be careful and, as you said, Tassos, very clear and transparent about the risks that can come along with certain technologies, and let's have very open conversations. We're not against science. Again, I'm making the point I made a number of times before. It's about who has access to the resources and how are they being used. And let's not overlook the wealth of biodiversity we have there, which, by the way, goes also in terms of, it's also relevant in terms of the economic added value of that biodiversity, because the biodiversity of foods that you have in a very specific EU country, you do not find it anywhere else in the world. That is like your economic added value that, also in terms of economic terms, in terms of tourism, in terms of gastronomy, in terms of products you can sell, it's what makes you stand out from the rest of the world. Isn't that something valuable to develop also, diversified economic systems that rely on local knowledge and culture and tastes, like you said, Tassos, as well, and that can really help us move beyond these, these challenges we're facing nowadays.
May I clarify a couple of things here, because I think it is important in the debate. First of all, I think I agree fully that we have a serious problem with biodiversity, but we have this problem with conventional breeding techniques. We don't have it because of biotechnology, because we don't apply biotechnology. So the problem of biodiversity is a problem of biodiversity. It's a problem of the relationship and the manner by which humans have acted so far. And there is plenty of scope of protecting what we have and increasing the biodiversity. But when we talk about the implementation of science, and especially the precautionary principle, that's why I raised the issue of vaccines. The vaccine that I got, and I got the second one last week, is a product of biotechnology. If the precautionary principle means zero risk, I shouldn't have been vaccinated. Exactly because it doesn't mean zero risk, and I don't think you also mentioned zero risk, we have to be very clear about what is the problem that we have to address and how exactly we are about to address it. So when we talk about drought risks, especially in the countries that in the south of Europe, we see them coming even greater, or because of the type of climate that we have in Northern Europe that is becoming more warmer than in the past, and therefore brings new type of diseases. When we use the full spectrum of technologies, the question is, do genome editing techniques are part of this scientific knowledge or not? Because if they're part, the rigor that we apply about the safety of a certain product should be the same, whether it's coming from one type of technique or the other. Either we face a safety risk on humans if we eat something because of one or the other characteristic, or we don't. And that this is exactly what this new study indicates, that looking into a legislation that was reflecting, by the way, different ways of addressing biotechnology 20 or 25 years ago, is not going to do probably the job probably with what is coming in the future. But it's obvious that we're going to have this type of discussion in the public consultation that's coming.
Great, thank you. With that, I think we're coming near to the end of our time. Just want to give you all an opportunity to provide any final comments or remarks if you'd like to make that kind of highlight or tie back the implications of the farm to fork strategy, particularly for U.S. agriculture. Let me go first, Alan.
I can jump in while the others have a quick think.
Yeah.
And also before my next door neighbour starts their lawnmower, which I can see happening right behind me. So I'll go quickly. Yeah, it was something that I said during the actual session itself, and I think it's very interesting. It's very difficult to answer the question, obviously, of how this is directly going to impact the US right now. So we had the first USDA, the first analysis, the first data. We expect to get a lot more data coming from the private sector, not from the Commission, who will not do the impact assessments that many thought would have been useful. So there is going to be data coming that's going to give a better picture of potential impacts. But I'd really like to stress again, and it's a little bit like even if the European Commission did do an impact assessment, that often means very little to the politicians in Europe. It's a nice talking point, but at the end of the day, it's the politics that will decide what's going to happen, not the data. So I think there's a lot of water to go under this bridge. There's a lot of discussions to be had, and I think as some of the points that have been raised by the panelists, you can see some of the issues and the disagreements that are coming. yes, there's a lot going to happen here across, may it be reminded, 27 bits of legislation that are going to touch on all different aspects of this issue that we're facing, from downstream, upstream, everything. So yes, I think it would be good to have one of these webinars every 6 months to sort of check in on where we are on this journey, because it's going to be an evolving picture, and it'll give Tassos an opportunity to get lots of questions every 6 months.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Tassos or Marta, any final remarks? Sure.
I don't know, maybe, yes, I don't know how many more 6 months I have, 2 actually, before I will give you hopefully an answer from a different angle than the one of the commission after retirement. Now, for the American audience, there is a farm sector in the United States. There is a two sector because you have a lot of trade, and there's a fork sector as well because you have consumers, which, by the way, are always right. So we're talking about the same type of issues on both sides of the Atlantic and throughout the planet. We're talking about productivity and best practices that reduce the environmental footprint, and they do it in a manner that also takes into account the need to be able to produce food, maybe in different combinations than today, in different quantities than today, but we're still going to need food tomorrow as we do today. So there, in the area of practices, the important message to pass is that this is not about a strategy about freezing technology. It is about a strategy that allows the full competition of best practices, provided that they all can demonstrate that they improve the level of ambition. And we have examples that they all do it, but it's not generalized yet. And that's a whole notion of moving the cap, at least we hope, in this direction. Second, on the two in the exchange, there is a very significant issue of leakage. If some move in one direction and others don't. And this is why it's extremely positive that the US administration and the US is back into the Paris Agreement. And it's also very important that climate change and climate action is a global challenge. And here, despite differences, we need to find a common ground on many of these issues. And finally, on the fork side, issues of obesity, unhealthy dietary patterns are also general, food waste, and these are issues that require changes in consumer behavior. What is the best way of arriving at these changes with this? Is it going to be with incentives or disincentives? There's going to be a big debate, but what is clear is that there is a need for change in consumer behavior. Without these changes, the whole fork side also risks not being very successful. So, I mean, we're talking here about similar type of problems that we face and challenges, and naturally, because we have different structures and backgrounds, we might end up with having some variations in terms of what we apply on the ground to address these challenges.
Great, thank you.
And if I can just so from our point of view, again, as you, Alan, said, it's still difficult to see what's going to be the impact of the farm to fork strategy in the US. But what we find it's very good, as mentioned before, it's the level of ambition, is that it is for the first time we see a strategy that is looking at the whole food system. And this is something that we had not seen before. So that's something very positive, because otherwise the risk of going in different directions along, at the different points of the farm to fork was very high, and in that sense it's a great starting point to try and tackle some of the big challenges we're facing, like you just mentioned, Tassos. And in that sense, the specific contribution that I want to bring, especially from slow food and working collaborations with many others, but this is really the slow food take, is, as I said, food is not just a commodity. What we're talking about here is not just an issue of supply and demand, and you said it as well, Tassos, there is much more in the picture than that. And, the beauty of this, the beauty of the farm to fork strategy is that it helps us to use food potentially as a way to, convene together to find ways through food, which is something that we deal with every day, breakfast to evening, if we're lucky enough to have access to food 3 times a day. But it's something that concerns us all, and it's something that allows us to take very concrete measures, even as citizens beyond elections in our everyday life, to go in a certain direction. So we see here a great opportunity. And I can also say what we are vouching for in Europe for the farm to fork strategy, if you want, is echoed by what Slow Food USA is saying. Like if you go on the website of Slow Food USA, there is also a section dedicated to the farm and food policy. And we are vouching for the same principles. So again, it's great that we're having these conversations, and yes, it would be great to have them in 6 months from now and every 6 months. And Tassos, we can invite you anyways, even if it costs your time.
Great. So again, thank you, Marta, Tassos, Alan. Thank you so much for your time and returning for this session. Thank you to our forum audience for your questions. We hope you'll join Farm Foundation again for another one of our timely forums, perhaps in 6 months for your suggestion. So thanks everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for